how do I coordinate and make them all get along? It seems like that is potentially a problem area, certainly a potential problem area when it comes to safety.
What we've done in the past is we actually have a DDS meeting, daily directional setting meeting every morning, and require at least one of the foremen from each contractor that's on site to attend that meeting. In that meeting, we start off with safety. We ask them their concerns, if there was any safety concerns the day before, and we try to correct those if there are any. And then we ask them what their safety concerns for the day is, that whether they're doing lifting, hot work, whatever it is, if they've got safety concerns, we'll note that, and our CM or safety director will be paying attention to that day. The next thing we ask them to do is set out their day. Let us know exactly what they're doing, where they're going to be doing it. If they're lifting or going to be in anybody else's way, we want to make sure that all the contractors know where they're lifting and whether or not they can go by them or not. And at that point, we have the contractors actually talking to each other and get along pretty well together, at least the last few projects I've worked on.
Yeah, we try to set that out up front when we're out looking for the contractors. We want all the contractors to know there's going to be multiple people working on the job site and that you have to get along. And, you know, we do a lot of the same thing that Mark's talking about there. And for CHS, if you have a proven track record of working well with other contractors, that bumps that experience level. If you've proven that you can't work with other subcontractors, sometimes not every job is cut out for you. So it's past performance and making sure that people know how to work together.
I mean, we basically follow almost exactly the same things. I was going to kind of humorously say you need to get a whip and a chair, because there's times that they won't do, and most of the arguments we end up with having to fend off is somebody using somebody else's porta potty or filling their dumpster full of something. I mean, most of them are pretty simple things to deal with. Generally, the contractors that we do business with play reasonably well together. They don't necessarily like each other, but they know that the rules are such that you're either going to play well or you're going to get kicked off my job site.
And one other thing you want is consistent contractor safety training. You want a consistent note to all your contractors. That way, if the contractor's walking around, they see another contractor doing something, they're not going to worry that they can't do it and start a fight and match like that.
Okay, good. How can I manage the quality of the work a contractor's performing if I'm a facility manager or an operations person and I'm not an expert in construction methods? What are some of the things I can do to make sure the contractor's following the design specs?
In our case, and I'm a bit opinionated on this, I think it's time to be an expert or phone a friend. I mean, there's expertise out there. There's expertise for hire. It's my role, and to make sure that the quality and things are happening as they should. We do a lot of third-party testing, concrete, steel, all those kinds of things. We'll bring in the expert on those things and make sure it's right. We use a lot of the engineering firms to come in and help us be experts in those things. But it's really your job to become that expert. You need to know what quality is and what's good. The other thing is there's pieces of a project where you can you just know what's right. A job site ought to be clean and ought to be safe. If you walk in and the job site doesn't looks like your kid's bedroom, you've got a problem going on, and generally contractors know the difference, and you can address those kinds of issues immediately.
Okay. For a design build or a turnkey project, how can I make sure that I'm getting quality design and quality equipment provided?
Well, first of all, when you're doing a large project, and I know we got a lot of design build contractors out there, and a lot of guys, they don't want to have somebody else in the middle between the owner and the contractor. But, to me, it starts with make sure you have a good industry expert on your team. He's neutral. So first of all, start with a good team. Get an industry expert that's working for you as an owner. And very clearly, you have to spec out what you expect from the contractor. you know, if you just tell a contractor, hey, I want to build a 750,000 bushel bin and just put it over there, I mean, the list that can vary from one bin to another, to the receiving equipment, to the fill equipment, it varies greatly. So you have to spec out very clearly what you expect from the contractor. And then, you know, we for the brand of equipment, we have a approved vendors list, and we work with a lot of the manufacturers, because some manufacturers, we believe the quality, and not only the quality, but the service after the sale. For us, we may have two pieces of equipment. They may be identical on how they're constructed. They're both built very well, but one of the manufacturers is going to stand up for that equipment. If you have a problem, he's going to be out there immediately to fix it. And we like to buy from a manufacturer who's going to stand behind what they produce. And then get your industry experts involved. Get their opinion on, is the design good? Are they using good equipment? Do they follow your specs all the way through? Don't rely on yourself, and don't listen to the contractor. Make sure you have somebody who's very experienced in building that type of facility to get his opinion, because everybody brings something to the table. And then we'd like to have the contractors turn as much in up front as possible. In other words, complete proposals, what brand of equipment, drawings, so we can understand what we're buying, so there's no surprises going into it. But that's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, I totally agree. What Jim's saying is correct. You need to have a hard spec up front. The better you spec your proposal, your RFQs, the better the life's going to be. And I agree. You need to be totally involved in the equipment selection process of this thing. You know, people that do projects for my company, they know that I'm involved in the equipment selection, and those specs are very specific. And we have a list of accepted vendors. You talk about how do you get in to be construction. It's harder to get accepted as an equipment vendor on our projects, because we just know what we want, and we spend a lot of time going through all of those details, because ultimately when that equipment fails, our facilities are down, and my life gets very hard because somebody's very upset with me.
All right. Have we generated any additional questions from the audience at this point?
Curious for you guys, the question is, who do you think should drive your safety culture on site? Which you guys as a corporation are the general contractor or subcontractor?
Yeah, the question is, who's in charge of driving the safety culture on site? Is it the owner, the contractor?
Well, I think it starts with the owner, obviously. But we choose our contractors, and like I said, our main reason we choose them is safety. That's what we look at first. So, but I think it's definitely on the owner to drive the safety and the culture.
Yeah, it's up to the owner, but it's also the contractor has to buy into it. And contractors have to get along when it comes to safety. You know, if you have one contractor that's a lot less concerned about the safety, he needs to make the owner aware of it. Say, you know, we've got some stuff going on the job site here that I'm concerned about. So the owner has to be engaged, but the contractors also have to be highly engaged.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, we'll move on. What can I do if I have a contractor that falls behind his schedule?
Yeah, I think that's the truth. Let me get my notes. The right one. You know, the first piece, and we tend to be very contract heavy in our things as far as our projects go. Know your contract, know what your rights are to put the pressure on that contractor. You know, if you have terms and conditions that include liquidated damages and all those kinds of things, you need to know where you stand on each one of those things. And like most things, catch it early. You better be paying attention to your project. You need to have an understanding of how long things should take. When you start seeing those slippage, you need to have those conversations with your vendors about how to get this stuff in on time. A lot of times it'll be a sub-vendor or an equipment supplier that's causing these kinds of things. Believe me, if one of our equipment suppliers is behind, they're going to get a personal phone call from me about how do we expedite those deliveries. There are things in a project that you can't do anything about. This particular year, weather has been a tremendous delay for my projects because they're typically on the river. We have to understand those kinds of things, but ultimately it's paying attention to what's going on and getting on it right away.
I agree wholeheartedly there.
I think agree with everything Ross said, and then also it makes a difference in the contractor selection up front, because when a contractor falls behind, do they have the internal horsepower or resources to man up and get back on schedule? Because sometimes they just don't have and they get behind, they're going to be behind all the way through because they don't have the internal resources or not willing to bring the internal resources to the table. So a lot of it starts with the contractor selection up front to make sure that the contractor is passionate about the schedule. I don't know about anybody else, but it seems like we always start our projects too late, but they still want them done by harvest, and then you get rain events. You want to deal with contractors that can get things back on schedule.
Very good. Should my construction contractor, warranty his work, and if so, for how long?
They shouldn't have to.
Okay.
When I look at warranty, the design, usually a year. You're going to know after 1 year, did everything work? The automation, all the valving, incline of the slopes, all that stuff. So a year for the design. Equipment, you're going to have to go back to your manufacturer. Sometimes you can negotiate with the manufacturer to get extended warranties. But again, then the next thing is on the equipment installation. I like to have 2 years on the equipment installation, just from the standpoint that you can take a good piece of equipment, do a poor job of installation, and you still got junk. So I like to see the installation for 2 years. Foundations, that's a tough one, because large rain events can affect, settlement and all that type of stuff. But I'd like to see up to 3 years on foundations. Spouting, liners, that type of stuff, I'd like to see a 2-year warranty on something like that. That's from my point.
I agree. Yeah, I don't.
Okay. Very good. Do we have any additional questions from the audience yet? Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
Okay, the system just fails to perform. It doesn't meet your expectations. Then what?
If the question is if the system fails to perform as expected, you don't get the throughput capacity, et cetera, what are your options?
You probably won't like my answer to this, but typically for our projects, we carry very heavy liquidated damages on it, and quite honestly, I'm going to hold on to your money and I'm going to go fix it, and I'm going to do it on your account and take it out of your thing. So if it really doesn't perform as expected, associated design build, you're probably not going to get the end of your payments, and I'm going to mobilize people that can fix it and make it work.
Okay. All right. How do I resolve disputes? I'm sorry, we got another question.
Who owns and drives their schedules?
The question is, who owns and drives the schedules?
Well, up front, it starts with the contractor selection and their value proposition. So a lot of times we'll make our selection process based on who can get to the job site, mobilized, and get the job done when we need it, because having a grain facility that's done 3 weeks after harvest really doesn't do you any good. So the original schedule is part of the selection process, and then once we decide on the contractor, we have to put all the other subs underneath the major contractor and make sure their schedule follows.
Yeah, we do basically the same thing. The general contractor owns that schedule, and it's my job to follow up on it, make sure that they're not slipping from that, and then if they are slipping from that, help expedite and remediate the issues that they have.
Okay. When disputes arise with the contractor, what are some ways to resolve those?
Well, you enter every project the same way. You hope for the best, but you have to plan for the worst. And, when you have a dispute with a contractor, by the time the dispute happens, you've you've got big issues going on the job site. So to me, it starts at the very beginning at the planning process. You know, you have to have a very clear scope. I always, in my world, you'll have a contractor who wants to turn in a 2-page proposal for a $10 million facility. Well, you know, you need to have the specs and the scope very clear. And I know some of the contractors aren't going to want to hear this, but as an owner, own the paper. Own the paper. It should be your contractor. It should be your contract. Do not sign the contractor's contract. Own the contract. If you as an owner, make sure that you can drive the papers, because it makes a difference in the resolution. And the big thing is I want to make sure the contractors list the complete list of exceptions. Tell me, I know what you're going to do for me. Tell me what you're not going to do for me. Okay, so now I have the contract, I have the specifications. I know what you're not doing. Now you have a dispute. I don't know how many here have been involved in legal disputes, but you want to get the thing resolved, and you want to keep it out of the court of law. I will tell you that, because nobody's going to win. The only one that's going to win in that battle is the lawyer. He's going to extract a fair amount of money from you. He's going to extract a fair amount of money from the contractor. And at the end of the day, both of you are going to be pissed off. So work hard, try to get a solution. Be a big boy. If it's not clear in the scope, and it's not clear in the exception, assumptions, well, I assumed you're going to do it that way, assumptions don't work. If it isn't clear, you as an owner need to be a big boy. If you haven't clearly spelled it out to the contractor and there's a dispute, you got to realize that maybe it's on you. You know, so, and that's tough to do sometimes, especially you're on tight budgets. You've made promises to your board of directors, you've made promises to the boss, and all of a sudden there's this issue that comes up. You got to handle it right. Be fair and reasonable. Be fair and reasonable. Put yourself in their shoes. What's the right thing to do? Because, you know, you get a large project, you're going to have disputes out there. And if I know, like in our case, CHS, we have a lot of the same contractors. We don't try to use the CHS club. We want to be fair and equitable on every dispute, make sure that it's fair to both parties. But I want to stress this: use the lawyers as a point of last resort. When they get involved, your schedule goes to heck and everything else. So try to work through them. Try to be honest, and you'll hopefully you'll come to a good conclusion.
I agree. It's all in the scope at the beginning of the contract. You just got to spell everything out and make sure you're not missing anything.
All right, thank you. How should I set up payment terms with the contractor? Should I keep a percentage as a retainer against future problems? And if so, how long and how much?
Obviously, this is in the scope too. It starts off with the scope, and it's spelled out before you start the project. What we like to do is a 30-30-30-10, 30 up front for procurement. Don't ever put down payment on an invoice; it'll never get paid. 30 halfway through the project, 30 at the end of the project, and then we usually keep about a 10% retainer until we absolutely know that the equipment or the project is gone and working just fine. We usually hold that for 30 days and have the equipment working for 30 days and then pay off the rest of it.
Yeah, I agree. It needs to be part of the contract as far as the scope going. We're slightly different. Typically, you know, we're paying as percentage complete on a monthly basis. Typical AIA kind of billing systems. We're looking at what's being completed, and we do hold retainage throughout the entire projects. You know, generally, we as a company for Dreyfus, we pay fast. Once it's approved, it moves through our system very quickly because we do want to get our contractors, keep them even, keep them in a good situation. But we also watch that cash flow, and the contractors are just at where they say they are. We really look on a monthly basis to what that percentage really ought to be. And a lot of times what the contractor asks for isn't necessarily what we think is true, and so we pretty much pay them on the percentages that we agree to after some negotiation.
What is your retention?
We typically hold 10%. That varies a little bit depending on what kind of liquidated damages. Again, I'm carrying performance damages in the back, so you could end up carrying 20%, depending on what those, because we're holding back whatever the liquidated damages would be.
Yeah, I believe in 10% retainage, and there's always a question of when the contractor gets to 10%. And, you know, we'll have somebody that will, well, I'm just about done. Can I go ahead and start drawing on my 10%? And for us, we don't like to distribute anything on the 10% until the facility's up and running. We want to know that everything works all the way through.
Okay, good. And the last question from me. As scope changes and delays inevitably occur on a project, how can I control back charges and extra charges from a contractor? And is there a way to budget or estimate those in the beginning?
You know, the truth is the only way you can do that is to mitigate them from the beginning by having a really solid scope in front of you. You know, what I wrote down in my notes is know your contract and know every dang word in it. When somebody comes to me with a change and a change order, you better have it backed up, and it better be something that's clearly defined in the contract. We put very strong specifications on our projects. We write a very strong contract, and it's a mutual thing between us and the contractor, but we know where they are. You know, there's some pieces in the contracts that become problematic. The word allowance to me just raises all kinds of red flags, because a lot of times those allowances are things that people didn't put the time into understanding what it was going to cost. I gave you a road allowance, and there's 6 inches of gravel on the top of that road. Well, gee, I can tell that that's never going to work anywhere, so I know the contractor didn't really want to pay attention to that thing, and he was just going to turn around, and sure as hell the first contract or the first change order has something about that road allowance on it. Allowances are real problematic on these design build contracts. You know, you got to do your homework up front on these things. If you're going to protect yourself from large change orders, you better know what your site conditions are before you get in there. Brownfield facilities and stuff, you better have a real clear understanding of what was there when you started. We've gone as far as we now go in and do laser scans of these facilities, and I put those in my RFQs, so there's a baseline information of exactly what that facility looked like when we started onto it, and the contractor knows exactly what those situations are. So we do a lot of things up front to protect ourselves against these change orders. Generally, you're going to see those kinds of change orders. There's going to be some. We definitely carry contingencies because there's still, no matter how good you do your due diligence on the front end, there are things that are going to come and catch you. You know, for us, a good project would be in that 5% kind of range at the end. We carry bigger contingencies for that, but that's sort of our goal, is not overrun these projects by more than 5%.
Well, you know, you've got back charges, and then you got change orders. You know, change orders are you like Ross says, you're going to have those in most construction projects. Something pops up, whether it's most time it's underground. I mean, that's where they happen. Like you find gas tanks that you didn't know were in place and that type of stuff. So that's common. But back charges, that's a little different story. We've had contractors want to come to us when the project's done and all of a sudden say, oh, yeah, this allowance, well, at the very beginning of the project wasn't enough, so I need to charge you back. You know, we're very clear. We want to know the change orders before any money's spent. We want to know that dollar right up front. If we need to talk about it before the work is done, not after the work is done.
No comment. We honestly just don't do back orders. If our contracts are really clear on that thing, and somebody does work on a site that they didn't tell us ahead of time, we just simply don't pay for it. I mean, you get into some really fun issues with that, but it's clear up front. The contractors do business with us, know that that's the situation. So again, our stuff tends to be change orders, and we know ahead of time. We just don't allow the other one.
Ours are all change orders also, and A lot of what I think these guys are talking about are new construction, and what we deal with an awful lot is 100-year-old buildings, and we know that we're going to have change orders, so we have to have contingencies in our contracts.
All right. Looking for more questions from the audience, and I would encourage you. You've got three gentlemen sitting up here with a lot of experience in managing construction projects in the grain industry. Now would be a good time to ask them a question.
What are some of the trends looking forward, some of the new things we're going to see in elevator design?
Oh, okay. Mark asked, what are some of the trends you see looking forward in elevator design? What's changing these days?
Well, that's a really big question. What we're seeing is more on the engineering side, because as we go into these facilities that are 100 years old, and some of them, I got a facility out in Portland that was built in 1904, and there's not information on those. So how do you go into those old brownfield facilities and deal with them? So we're doing a lot more 3D modeling of these facilities. We're doing a lot more laser scanning of these facilities where we can go in and get information. It's fairly difficult to put pieces into something that exists like that. So we're seeing some technology on the engineering side that's allowing us to do a better job of that upfront engineering. And quite honestly, the technologies are brand new. I talked about the laser scanning. Those laser scanners just became available in a price range that we couldn't even conceive, and the technology isn't quite caught up with that. But we literally have virtual environments of these facilities that we can model back into and build equipment that literally drops in the hole. That's new. That's something that just wasn't available 10 years ago, and 5 years ago it cost you a fortune. So we're seeing some of those kinds of trending thing. We're seeing some negative trending on some of the equipment designs and stuff like that. Those same high-level engineering technologies, the finite element analysis and all those things, are letting the equipment designers take that safety out of their equipment. And we're seeing the equipment just barely meet the requirements all the time. So we're having to spend a lot of time making sure that the equipment is really up to snuff and what we want it to do.
A question back here?
Well, what do you guys look for when you look at the construction schedule as far as, validating, does it make sense?
Yeah, the question is, when you look at the contractor's construction schedule at the beginning, what are some of the things you look for as far as validating whether that's reasonable and it's something that can be achieved?
I think it goes back to what Jim said earlier. You look at the contractor and make sure they've got the horses to match that schedule. Depends on, up north, Minneapolis, where I'm from, we got to consider an awful lot of weather up there. So you just look at it, and you got to know that your contractor can staff up if they need to, if they get behind.
One of the things we find is as we go through these the actual hard schedule, is you need to look for some knowledge that lives in that thing, like the number of float days. If you see a contract that has no float at all in it, you're pretty sure that the guy that put it together didn't know what the hell he was talking about. So I really will go back through these schedules and I'll peel all those float days out of it to make sure that there's adequate guesses as far as each one of those individual pieces. There's a lot that you can glean out of the contract out of the schedule without actually knowing how long something takes. Because you can see that, he thought this thing took 10 days, but he wasn't real sure, so he put 2 days of float in, and he's thought this through. You can see their consciousness in those schedules. And I look for that. I look for somebody that's actually thought the process through. And again, like Mark said, make sure that they've got the horses to pull the plow. If they're showing 60 people for some task, and there's 20 of them, you better have a plan for how he's getting those subcontractors in place to make that happen.
I agree with that.
A question back here? Reagan?
Which codes in different areas as far as UBC or IBC that you guys look for or require on site?
The question is building codes, UBC, IBC. Is it company dependent, location dependent?
For us, it's location dependent. I mean, some counties have adopted one or the other, so you have to always go back to your local authorities and find out what they've adopted.
Yeah, that's exactly what we do.
Yeah, they can come up with surprises on you too. I'm putting in an enclosed conveyor in Minneapolis. I had the elevator inspector stop by a week ago and cited me for not having an elevator permit for putting in an enclosed conveyor. We have settled that, but if you go back in their code book about 70 pages, you can find something on belt conveyors way back in the day. So there's always something that can come up, but it's usually local or on site.
All right, one more. Right back here. The question is energy efficiency important in the design and upgrade of facilities? Is it something you guys look for?
It is something we look for, especially in Minneapolis with all the rebates and things. We can get an awful lot of money back on most of our projects. So we set up the project where it's not as efficient as it's supposed to be. We add in the efficiency, and our power companies will give that back to us. So it works for us. We have to look at that stuff.
I mean, we're basically in the same spot. We have to take a look at it. The difficulties that we do have is that when I take that up the management chain in our organization, they don't necessarily allow my project to benefit from that. It's just kind of expected. It's kind of just something that you're supposed to be doing because it's the right thing to do. So it's kind of the card you have to even play the game. You know, somebody said table stakes. It's table stakes anymore.
I agree.
Oh, one more question, Jess?
Where does the safety record of the contractor come in? So the contractors that you've worked with, where does the safety record of them come in as opposed to the cost or, their previous work on a project?
You know, we're very conscious of the safety record. We pretty well have a hard line. If you don't meet a given safety record, it's again table stakes. You don't get to play. Unfortunately, if you can't make those safety requirements, I really don't have alternatives. My management would not allow it, so you got to come to a given level to even play.
We're exactly the same.
Okay, that's it. Please join me in a round of applause for Mark Fedje, Ross McEllhiney, Jim Gales. Thank you, gentlemen.